Hello, friends, and welcome to the Living Truth Podcast. This is Kristin Cary hosting today, and I am very excited to be interviewing Isabel Williams. Izzy, thank you so much for joining me on the Living Truth Podcast today.
It's such a pleasure, Kristin. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Hmm. You guys, Izzy is a certified trauma-informed coach, and she specializes in betrayal trauma. She provides restorative marriage support, separation and divorce support, and crisis intervention work that comes with the discovery of sexual betrayal in marriage. Izzy also is an avid mountain biker and snowboarder who loves the mountains. That's so fun.
I do. Yes.
And she's a mom and a wife and so many things. But I've had the privilege of knowing Izzy since August 2021 when she called, or I called her on the phone. I think your husband had reached out for help. You guys had just had a discovery, and you were in a really rough spot. What was your life like at that time, Izzy?
Wow. It's such a it's a huge thing to crack open, isn't it, and look back on. But
It
at the same
is.
time, yeah, at the same time, it's quite amazing that I'm in a place now where I can think, wow, yeah, I was in that place, which just kind of demonstrates to me that I'm not there anymore.
Yeah.
I was extremely shattered, broken. I would say disorientated. Shock. I guess that's shock, just a huge place of shock
Yeah.
with the discovery of my husband's other life, really. And yeah, I desperately needed help, didn't know where to go. And yeah, my husband reached out and somehow led me to Women in the Battle, which I'm still not quite sure how that happened, but I really think that that was the hand of God in that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, and I do remember very vividly how vehemently opposed you were to the idea of joining a group at that time. And the next thing I knew, within about a month, you joined a Women in the Battle group. And we'll talk more about that
Mm.
later on in our interview. But I just remember the dogged determination with which you pursued your recovery once you were all in.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. 100%. I think in that place of trauma, when it's so intense and so severe, you often don't really know what you need. And fear, I mean, you can be totally ruled by fear, can't you? So I was
Yes.
really afraid of this idea of a group. So yeah, but once I was in, it was a lifesaver. Absolutely.
So life-changing to you that you decided to become a coach and help women now. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is the importance of creating structure after discovery. And discovery just usually throws our world into total chaos. It impacts our nervous system, our brain, our bodies. I mean, everything gets thrown into chaos. And so it is really important to create that order and structure in order to be able to reestablish safety. So, what are your thoughts about that? That need for creating structure and order after that chaos?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Thanks, Kristin. I think I really wanted to talk about this because what I found is in the fallout of the discovery of betrayal, there's just chaos. As you said,
Yeah.
emotional chaos ensues, and your brain literally goes offline because you're instinctually now threatened and you want to survive. So structure and order are sort of these very fundamental principles that we need in order just to function in everyday life, and they go out the window when this great crisis occurs. So I think it's such an important message for women to hear that you can create structure and order in the midst of the chaos. So I'm really passionate about encouraging and helping women to refine themselves again.
Mhm.
And it is a marathon and not a sprint. And whilst that seems like not great news, there's a huge opportunity there to do some really good long-term healing once you get into a place where you realize, well, I need to put some structure in now, seeing as I've found out that this aspect of my life isn't what I thought it was, so that it doesn't become all consuming in the long run, because it is all consuming in the initial phases of discovery. So that's why I really wanted to speak into this today.
I love it. And so tell me some different areas in which a betrayed partner needs to create that structure.
Yeah, structure might sound scary, and undoable. Like I can't do that in this in that mental space that trauma creates,
Yeah,
or the betrayed spouse. But the structure is so important because it basically looks like getting together a baseline plan of how am I going to manage this? How am I going to cope? How am I going to deal with this? So I just want to give some takeaways how to do that, because practical steps are necessary, aren't they, for
they are.
traumatized mind. So the first thing with structure, I would say, post discovery or post disclosure, is identifying your safe people. And this is something actually Living Truth have done so well in your curriculum, which I benefited from. I never actually thought to stop and consider, well, who do I tell about this? You can run blindly and go and tell the first person you meet in a traumatized state, and that's obviously not necessarily a wise thing to do. So finding and establishing those safe people. So for me, I had a really close friend. She's a solid kingdom woman. That's how I would describe her, spiritually mature. And I went to her straight away, and she was my safe person. She'd actually been through betrayal herself 16 years prior. She was actually one of my close friends in my church, and she really helped me. She met me where I was. She didn't give me um, any difficult advice or anything that would perhaps make things worse. So I really established who my safe people were. And I wrote down a list actually. Who can I trust with this huge, groundbreaking, life shattering information? Because I felt scared and I didn't want to tell people. I felt humiliated. I felt ashamed. I felt terrified. I couldn't tell my family. So one of the things I realized was at that time, my family were not safe. My immediate family were not safe people. I didn't want to hurt them emotionally, and I didn't feel that they would have anything to offer me emotionally that would help the process.
So this is such an interesting concept. We talk about this a lot in recovery communities about safe people. And what what was it that you intuitively knew in your gut about your family that made you go like this is not safe for me to tell them?
Um, Truthfully, without dishonoring my family, who I love so much, they wouldn't have had the emotional capacity or understanding at the time due to their own brokenness. So that was probably what it was, is where they would be kind of spiritually, emotionally, didn't feel stable landing ground for me. And I was able to trust that. And so that's the reason why I didn't tell my
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm curious about like how a person would assess whether a person is safe and has the capacity for that or not. And one of the things that immediately came to my mind when you talked about that is if that person talks about other people behind their backs and is judgmental about others behind their backs, that's one red flag to say this person may not be safe. What do you
Mhm.
think are some of the other signs that you would say this person may not be the safe person that I need to entrust my story to?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Kristin. Again, it's not always easy to decipher that, is it? When you're in the
No,
throes of trauma, it can be
right.
very difficult. It's very difficult to listen to your gut. You may have become detached from that. So
Yeah,
often we have that intuitive, the second brain, right, in the gut. Often we have that intuition, but that can become so diminished.
very much so.
Even before betrayal, many women have been, if they've been trying to survive their marriage due to destructive behaviors, even before they discovered or were
Yeah.
disclosed to, can become very cut off from their instinct and their knowing. But I think certain red flags that would help a woman to know who are my safe people is, for example, yeah, how they talk, how they speak about other people. I think it's also due to I think the closeness of the relationship, the nature of that friendship. I still think a woman can gauge what is a close friendship and who is safe if she just takes a look back or casts her mind back to what kind of relationship do they have. I think their level of emotional maturity is super important. And
Mhm.
I think closeness, are you close to that person? Is it kind of like a sort of a more superficial friendship, so to
Yeah.
speak? Is it someone you don't see very often? Not to say that that doesn't make them trustworthy, but again, I think it's people that have like-minded values with you as well. I mean, I was just very, very clear, even though I was very detached from my instinct and my gut. I knew quite clearly who I couldn't tell.
Yeah.
So the strange thing is, I was still able to know my gut instinct, even though I felt very lost in myself.
Yeah.
Very
That's a
difficult.
gift, Izzy. And there's incredible women I know who um in their trauma told everybody in there, like it's like a fire hose, a dam breaks, and like a panic reactivity to tell everybody, and then later that becomes a huge source of pain and regret. So if you're a betrayed partner listening to this episode, this is just a great it's a great time to give pause to who am I talking to about what I'm dealing with, and who am I entrusting this part of my life to. Another thing I think of, Izzy, in terms of who is safe and who is not, is who are the people that are going to give me unqualified love and support without giving me pushy advice that may be toxic because they don't know how to manage this.
I mean, that's absolutely true. Yeah, and sometimes it's a case of elimination rather,
Yeah.
before you work out who you're going to tell. What I've had some of my clients do is actually make a list of who do they feel is safe and who is unsafe. And again, I think that's something that you cover so well in your curriculum. And I think when we write down who feels safe to me and we write down the reasons why, we can help to sort of plan that out, kind of like a mind map to see, yeah, I feel safe telling this person, or no, I don't feel like I could tell this person because in the past, maybe I told them something and I really felt like they didn't understand, or they tried to counsel me, and actually, counsel isn't necessarily what I'm looking for. So I think that's a really good point that you make.
Yeah. What else does that partner need to start to create that structure and order?
Yeah, I think once you've established who's my safe people, who can I talk to, who can I download to, or even just say, look, I'm going through a really hard time. Will you pray with me? Or, can you just, help me or listen to me? Once that's in place, it's really important to find professional help.
Hmm.
I say that to say, if I hadn't had the professional help that I had, I know I wouldn't have made it through. I have had so much education, psycho education, just on my inner world, um, and tapping back into myself. I've had so much good education that's come through my coach, my therapist, my groups. Um, and I can't imagine not having those. I can't imagine going through the betrayal experience and not having people who understand exactly what I've been through and who've been there themselves.
Well, and honestly, so many people that go through betrayal immediately go to a marriage counselor. And that's not what Izzy's talking about here in terms of your professional team, because general marriage counselors do not have the specialized training in the complexities of betrayal and compulsive sexual behavior for the person that has done the betraying to be able to help that coupleship. And so marriage counseling, typical marriage counseling, is actually not advised, and that's shocking to some of our listeners. So when Izzy's talking about getting your team, she's specifically referring to a coach and or a therapist who is trained in partner betrayal trauma. And there are several different types of trainings that are out there, and AppSats is one of them. There's a couple others. Manwala has training. There's some really specialized training, and the vast majority of therapists out there do not have that specialized training.
Mm.
Also, there's several different types of groups out there. You're talking about finding a group, and a group that follows the partner trauma model, and that is not just a one size fits all um, spiritual approach
Mhm.
or psychological approach, but one that integrates somatic practices and psychoeducation and spirituality is ideal, and that is a trauma model, because there are lots more of those now, but it used to be that many groups followed a co-addict model and had that partner looking at what they did wrong and how they caused part of the brokenness in their marriage, and that is actually re-traumatizing and unhelpful. So, Izzy, when this went down for you in 2021, how long did it take you to find the right team for yourself?
Well, I consider myself actually really fortunate because it was pretty quick. I mean, once I was already getting emails into my inbox from Leslie Vernick. Um,
Oh,
I think I looked her up a while back and signed up to her email list, and I think through that, that's actually how I found Living Truth, Women in the Battle.
that is possible because I recorded a few podcast episodes with her in 2021. She was a mentor to me in creating Women in the Battle.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's how I found Women in the Battle. So, I mean, I got into the group with Women in the Battle really quickly, and met women that were going through the same thing as me. And I instantly felt that sense of, okay, I'm not alone. So the fear was diminished very quickly. And I also found a coach through Women in the Battle, who I was with for 2 years. She was fantastic. She helped me so much. And one thing I will always remember is she did not give me all the answers. She was with me. She was with me through the whole experience, and that was extremely powerful. And she gave me good tools, and she was a fantastic listener. So, and she was trauma informed. And really, that's what you're talking about is the the high importance of seeing a coach, a therapist, joining a group who can see this experience, the betrayal experience, through the trauma lens, because the trauma lens really changes everything. When we understand certain behaviors through the trauma lens, it enables us to be so much more helped, or if we're a clinician or a coach, enables us to help with so much more accuracy because we can understand behaviors better. We can understand, this strange behavior or this irrational behavior isn't because this person's crazy. It's actually it's a trauma symptom, and we can treat it as such. So that it's, yeah, I get what you're saying totally about the MPTM model, the multidimensional partner trauma model, which APSATS trains in. And it's I would say, it's vital to have that training, to go with a clinician or a coach or a therapist in a group that has that trauma lens, 100%.
You know how I was saying, like, so many people go to marriage counseling. The
Mhm.
other place people go to is their spiritual leaders, their pastor, or a biblical counselor at their church who is not like a licensed therapist trained in the trauma model. But these places, fortunately, I think more spiritual leadership is experiencing some training in trauma, but it's still few and far between that a spiritual leader who is really trained in theology, right? And trained in maybe some pastoral care, but not in it. It's like trying to go to a general practitioner who is like has to do all kinds of things, right? When what you really need is a cancer doctor for your cancer diagnosis. Like when we go to a pastor to try to get comprehensive care for sex addiction, betrayal trauma, etc., they just don't have the training for that, and it can actually create a lot more problem and damage. And a lot of what we look at through a purely theological lens, and when I say that, realizing most of us are looking at theology through a Western lens, of a Western cultural lens, and not through the lens with which the scriptures were originally written. And we pull verses out of context and slap them on people and give them a heavy burden, kind of like the Pharisees did with the Jews back in the day, right? And we create more problems and trauma and more confusion for that betrayed partner.
Right.
Did you have that experience at all of any kind of spiritual trauma as a result of that?
Yeah, I absolutely did. And, I want to speak to that, Kristin, because that's, something else that's really on my heart at the right time is to help equip the church.
Yeah.
I love the church, and I think so many pastors desperately want to help. But yeah, they just are ill-equipped. So I just think that there are some great upcoming resources, which you'll probably know of. There's a Door of Hope, Donna Dixon, that does some really good trauma training there for running groups to help betrayed spouses. There's Pure Desire Ministries, which aim to equip churches and church like pastoral staff to help with sex addiction and betrayal. So I just name drop those because I think they're so good at trying to do exactly what you're talking about. When
Hmm.
betrayed partners do go to their pastoral people and they don't get the help they want, that's incredibly difficult. And yes, it can be a lot more damaging. That was part of my experience a long time ago in the beginning, when I went to one of my pastors. And yeah, I was given I was given seemingly spiritual biblical advice, but it just really, what it did was it made me behave in such a way that I enabled more toxic behavior. Um, and again, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. I thought that I was being a good Christian wife and doing what I should do. And actually, I didn't have any insight or clarity or understanding that there's actually more healthy things I could have done for myself in order to start the healing journey. So it just basically prolonged the pain and just the further discoveries in destructive behavior. Had I been given the trauma-informed advice, I think that road possibly could have been shortened quite a lot.
I'm very curious about what what the toxic advice was, not because I want to
Yeah.
like drill into that, and it may be too personal of a question. So this was not planned, people. So Izzy, decline if you don't feel comfortable answering. But because I know so many women receive repeated, there's very predictable advice based on a lot of
Mhm.
misinformed books and misinformed belief systems in the modern day church. There's a lot of advice that's very repeated that women get from pastors that creates this cycle, kind of enabling the either unwanted sexual behavior or other
Yeah.
forms of abusive behaviors. So if you're willing to talk about that, I'm curious about what the advice was and what you believe the trauma informed advice needs to be to
Yeah.
replace that.
Yeah, no, again, it's a great question, and I think I'm happy to talk about it. For what experience I have. I was given advice like the first thing I was told was divorce is a terrible thing, Izzy. This is once I had my first discovery. Divorce is a terrible thing. And reconciliation is the best thing. It's the right way. It's best for you. It's best for your children. I was told, I know it sounds really corny, and that's probably because it is. I was told to forgive and not to forget, but to move on. And this was from a pastor that I loved. I loved him and I respected him. He was a great leader. And, today I know his heart was in the right place.
Absolutely.
But he was ill-equipped to counsel me or to help me and my husband. So yeah, I definitely got extremely destructive advice. I was also counseled by another pastor, a female pastor, who told me to make myself more sexually available to my husband. And again, that was deeply destructive for me and as a woman, as an individual, to my sexuality, and to ultimately to my position as a wife in the marriage. And it did create further confusion. And also, it wasn't any help to my husband in the long term. So it's typically a form of spiritual abuse, although it's not intentional abuse necessarily. But it's very dangerous. And Christian wives live under that um, heavy and dangerous, spiritually dangerous because it's unhealthy. Misunderstanding that it's her duty to return to a sexual relationship with her husband in the fallout of betrayal, because if she doesn't, she's somehow displeasing God. Um, I was one of those wives that believed that. I truly did. I wanted to be a good Christian wife. I wanted to be a good daughter to God, and I lacked the insight and understanding of actually how to heal, and that that is not the correct way. It's not conducive to beginning the recovery on for both partners on both sides. So the trauma lens changes all of that. Um, Again, for both for the partner and for the betrayer. And that's so important, that if pastors can see through the lens of trauma and actually start digging with the husband, for example, well, let's look at why this is happening. Why have you done this? I mean, in my situation, no questions were asked. It was simply to assume that he'd made a mistake and we needed to return to reconciliation as quickly as possible and kind of move
Mhm.
on. Very damaging, very destructive advice.
So they neglected to be able to explore the heart root issues beneath your husband's sexual behavior. And they also operated with an assumption that he was being truthful, that what had come to light was all there was,
Yes.
when I'm sure that wasn't true, was it?
No, not at all. And I think, my heart goes out to husbands who do that, who continue to live with that secret sexual basement.
Yeah.
Because in giving that advice, there's actually no freedom for the betraying husband or the betraying spouse. And that's deeply sad. And it delays their recovery as well. But no, I mean, it doesn't, if pastors and pastoral staff don't ask the questions and do the do the deeper digging to find out, well, what's the roots of this behavior,
Hmm.
rather than trying to save the marriage and quickly move on, then the whole process will be sabotaged and there can't be any healing. There can't be true reconciliation or restoration, because you've got two very broken partners, no healing, no understanding, no insight. It's not going to
Yeah.
go anywhere.
And it's important, I think, for people listening to this who are not trained in these problematic sexual behaviors and betrayal trauma to understand that 98% of people with unwanted sexual behavior are not going to be truthful and upfront from the get-go. So the assumption, rather than, oh, well, he did this one thing and he's sorry, so it's time to forgive and move on, the assumption needs to be, this is the tip of the iceberg. There's far more below the surface,
Mhm.
and I'm not the person to explore that. That's not something that a pastor or a spiritual leader or even a therapist who's not trained in therapeutic disclosure is capable of really digging into, because this is like a deep dark mine that requires scaffolding and supports and lots of special equipment to dive into and to minimize the fallout for the partner.
Yeah, I mean, I love your analogy there of specialist equipment before you start digging into. That's so true. That's an excellent way of putting it. Very much so. And again, I think our heart towards pastoral staff has to be one of mercy and
Yes.
understanding that they need equipping.
Yeah.
Um, and that's going to be fundamental, I think, moving forward for Christian wives and husbands who
Yeah.
struggle with this, either the secret sexual basement and then the fallout of discovery or disclosure of betrayal. If we're going to save marriages,
Hmm.
the church will need to be well equipped with that, with the proper tools, with that equipment. So yeah, that's really good
Or
what you
to
say.
stay with the fact that they are like the general practitioner,
Mhm.
and to refer to the cancer specialist. You know, like that analogy of like, maybe that's not their within their jurisdiction of being able to dive deep into that, because it's such a specialized niche. And
Mm.
that's why seeing a therapist or a partner trained coach who got training in this area is so vital, right? Because it is
Yeah, 100%.
very specialized. So back to the structure. We were talking about getting your team, and you talked about your getting your therapist or your coach, getting your safe people, getting your group. What else?
Yeah, your professional coach, your therapist, your group. And then once those things are in place, the real healing can start to begin to happen. So once the healing begins and we take that deep dive to go inside, the third thing that a betrayed spouse needs to get in place is a plan, a baseline plan for her self-care. And it seems pretty obvious, but again, if you've been surviving in a marriage with destructive behavior, whether you knew about sexual addiction or infidelity or not, we often are so detached from taking care of ourselves and listening to our own voice. What do I need? I didn't know what I needed in the beginning. I wasn't accustomed to asking myself what I needed or even knowing because I was trying to hang on to my marriage. I desperately wanted it to work. So I poured everything into my husband and my kids and trying to be something that I thought if I could be that, then things would get better. So self-care is so important. And just to explain what the self-care is, it could be simple things, simple practices like, do I need to get more time outside and start exercising? Do I need to begin to use my voice more where I speak up and express my needs? And then I mean even before that, do I even know what it is I need? Do I even ask myself what I need? So it's a going inside and becoming conscious of finding me again instead of just only seeing yourself in the context of your marriage and in the light of your husband and what he wants and what he needs. And that's the deep journey that needs healing, is because so many betrayed spouses forget who they are, what they need, and the self-care part is intrinsic to the healing of the betrayed spouse.
It's essential. You're right. So I'm curious about what that was like for you, Izzy, early on in your journey, because we ask that question so much in Women in the Battle. What do you need?
Mm.
How did that land for you? And what were your first aha moments that, oh yeah, I have needs and I could start to meet them? And how did that unlock some healing potential for you personally?
I think it was truly my sessions with my therapist that really helped me to realize I don't know what I need. My coach got me through the survival part after discovery and disclosure. My therapist has really helped me to dig deep, deep, deep into finding Izzy again and realizing, yeah, I have a voice. And what I realized through therapy was um, I was not accustomed to saying what I wanted, so I never got my own way. And I never felt my needs were met because I always kept quiet because I was too afraid. And I wanted my husband's needs to be met because in the hope of them being met, then I would be safe and it would all be held together. So the self-care for me took a while. It really did. It didn't happen immediately, being honest. I'm 4 years in and my self-care now is excellent. So I mean now I know how to care for myself because I know how to listen to myself. So another important part of self-care is listening to yourself. What do I need? How do I feel? The important part of self-care as well, Kristin, is it's the rebuilding, it's the beginning of the rebuilding of the self, which gets shattered in the discovery of betrayal. So rebuilding of the self looks like boundaries work. So many of us Christian women in particular, I find as clients don't have boundaries and don't have a concept of boundaries. And I myself did not have a concept of boundaries, didn't really know what they were, or how to implement them or how to enforce them. So boundaries is a huge part of self-care. Also examining maybe unhealthy habits or coping mechanisms that we've developed in order
Mm.
to survive, which don't serve us anymore, that we need to start to change. So we can implement healthy habits. It could be sleep. It could be more exercise. It could be rest. It could be connecting with nature. It could be taking up a new hobby or a sport. It could be slowing down. I mean, there's numerous things, and all these things are actually very, simple, and it's very cognizant, isn't it, to consider them? But we don't do them sometimes when we're in survival mode in that situation of being in a destructive marriage and
Yeah.
the fallout of betrayal.
Yeah, and it is to tag on to that, in order to prioritize that self-care, there's a million things we have to stop. And I don't just mean destructive behaviors. I mean good things, like I volunteer for the PTA and I am on this board at church and I serve in this ministry and all these good things that we do. I tell women, treat yourself like you had just gotten out of the hospital after a catastrophic car wreck. How long would you be prioritizing your health and recovery and prioritizing things like PT appointments and, wound dressings and all of that? Like, you don't have capacity to do all the things you would normally do, to bake the cookies for the new neighbors and or whatever. As women, so often we overextend ourselves and want to take care of everybody else's needs, and we feel selfish if we are prioritizing our own needs. But what you're saying, Izzy, is so foundational, that self-care and turning to what we need. I think there's a big buzzword in the culture about self-care, like, oh, bubble baths and like face masks and like pampering. That's not what Izzy's talking about. I mean, that could be a bubble bath, could be good self-care, but she's talking about something far more foundational,
Mm.
not only to starting to recover, but to actually survive and live with your spirit, body, and mind in alignment with your values and who God is calling you to be. It's so critical. You're right.
It is, Christian, and you hit the nail on the head when you say that it's so much more than that. It's so much more than that. It's self-care. That's the kind of superficial side of self-care, bubble baths and those kind of things. And those things have their place, absolutely. But the fundamental self-care that comes out of the rebuilding of the self is attention to the inner world, isn't it?
Yeah.
And part of that is the therapy. I mean, I can give an example. My therapist, she's wonderful. She does child of origin work, so that could tackle some of my in-ground unhealthy coping mechanisms that I was bringing into my marriage, which weren't serving me, which were actually causing me to tolerate distressing and destructive behaviors without me even realizing it. So
Can you
when I,
give me an example
sure, of what? Sorry, of a
of
destructive.
the unhealthy behaviors or mindsets that you brought into the marriage that you've needed to work on to rebuild yourself?
Yeah, so I've never felt that I could say no to most things, to decisions, or I was always too afraid. And really lying beneath that was the fear of rejection.
Yeah.
That if I said no, or if I got my way, that I might be rejected,
Yeah.
or I wouldn't be loved. It was almost tied to a performance thing. And without going too deep, just for the sake of time, that was very much something from my childhood,
Yeah.
where certain things happened to me where I realized I didn't feel I was able to say no. I had to say yes to everything, and particularly with my father. So again, the masculine energy, if you like, or figurehead in my life, somehow I interpreted that as I can't say no. I don't have a voice. So the therapy for me helped restore my awareness of, well, actually, it is okay for me to say no, and it is okay for me to have my way on certain issues. And if the other doesn't like that, well, that's okay. I don't need to fear a threat of rejection, or that person being unhappy. And again, there's a whole there's a whole story there of enmeshment and me being unhealthily tied. Some people like to call it codependence. Um, I think the trauma model would say that that's a trauma symptom that causes the the betrayed spouse to be emotionally, traumatically tied to the emotions of her husband in order to survive.
Well,
So,
it was rooted in your childhood. It was a fawn response, right?
yeah,
That is a
uh,
safety threat response to you will lose the attachment with your, in this case, with your dad, if you
yes,
use your voice and say no. And so in order to adapt as a child, you fawned, pleased, you just acquiesced and accommodated. And that gets woven into our brains unconscious
yeah,
patterns. And so, yeah, I appreciate you bringing up, like some people would call that codependent, but from a trauma model lens, that is actually a trauma response. And we carry that into marriage and other relationships.
yeah, we do. We carry it in and it's extremely destructive. And
Yeah.
it's not your fault that you behave that way. It's a survival coping mechanism. And if you've lived in that long term, it's just your norm. It's just normal. But it's very unhealthy and it's not normal. And through therapy, I was able to really deal with that and recognize it first of all and then work on tapping into this freedom that I don't actually need to worry about that. I don't actually need to fawn and always make sure the other gets their own way. Um, Again, it's a lengthy process without going into all the detail, but that's one of the ways that partners can heal and build that sense of self back again. Um, my therapist gave me an excellent exercise. We went through child of origin work, and I remembered when I was well, from the age of about 8 right through to my early teens, I used to ride my bike. And I loved riding my bike. And you're a bike rider too, I think. And I loved riding my bike. And then I stopped doing that when I was about 17, 18. Life went on. I went off to university and then I got married and, da 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 da, had children and I didn't ride my bike anymore. I didn't really think much of it. But anyway, through this wonderful therapy exercise that she took me through, I have come back to, she told me to pick up something from my childhood that I really, really loved and I found peace in and enjoyment in, and it was bike riding. So I went out when I was in England in 2020, I think it was 2023. I went out and I bought myself a bike and I started riding my bike again. And such a simple practice as that, it brought back and reintegrated a part of myself that I'd lost that has come back to me and it has helped solidify my healing. And I can't really fully explain exactly how, but it's a finding of the self, and I love bike riding. I get so much enjoyment from going out on my bike all by myself around country lanes in England or here in Columbia, South Carolina. And that is an example of something I've put in place to care for myself and to build myself back again, to rebuild that shattered Izzy. Um, and it really has made a huge difference. I mean, it's just a piece of the puzzle, but it's one of the important pieces of the puzzle, if that makes sense.
It so makes sense, Izzy. And I absolutely love hearing about your journey from this shattered place when I talked to you in August of 2021 into this place of post-traumatic growth. I do want to say to our audience that Izzy and I had a conversation about this very thing I'm going to say right now offline earlier about how you can hear this story and be like, oh, like Izzy's all better and everything's great. Or you might think Kristin leads this ministry and she leads women in the battle, so she's doing great. And post traumatic growth, we talk about post traumatic growth, and I think we all idealize what that means, like as if we're not still really suffering, but we live in such a fallen, broken world. We are still broken and fallen. And we have, struggles like pain, real struggles and real pain. And it is not all tied up neatly with a bow. But I love how you're representing these just, quote, small things like getting a bike and starting to ride on a regular basis because it brings you joy and it's part of what your soul loves. God made you to experience joy and delight. And it sounds like being out in nature is part of that for you too. And so incorporating those things helps you see and live in the joy that God created you for in connection with Him. But that does not mean it's all tied up with a bow and life is all easy. But that post traumatic growth has led you to a place where you want to be there for other betrayed partners. And so you've started coaching and you just became a facilitator in Women in the Battle. And I am curious about what that journey is like for you to join with, you have two fabulous co-facilitators, Corey and Leslie, and to join with them in leading a group of women and watching that group of women transform. What is that experience like for you?
It's I'm in awe of it a little bit, to be honest, because three years ago would never have seen myself able to be, this healed. And I really appreciate what you say, Kristin, that you can experience incredible post-traumatic growth and healing. And I love telling women that. I love to tell them that you can go from a place of very severe trauma to thriving. But at the same time, what exists simultaneously is being in a place of post-traumatic growth and thriving, and it's still being hard and messy at times.
Yeah.
I think we'd like to think that we can move from the one to the other, but actually, I think the both can coexist, and they often do. Um, and I think that's hope. That's the message of hope for betrayed women. And I love to be able to sit in a place now, not having it all together, joining with the women in the group and saying, today I'm feeling sad and anxious, and, just like you, but at the same time being in that special honored place of being able to lead them and say, hey, it's going to be okay. You're going to get through this. And joy does come back. It really does. But I recognize fully that when you're in that first, second phase of trauma, you don't see that. You don't see that. It's in the thick of it. It's finding a way through, and it's a dark place, like you said, Kristin. But
Yeah.
definitely, it's a privilege to be able to sit with women and be an encouragement to them. I love those women in the group. And I see you can be in that place and see they're going to make it through. They don't see that right now, but they do need to be told that you're going to make it through. And I think as well, what you're speaking about is the resilience that lies inside women. It's the resilience and the strength that's often been squashed and shattered that they need to get in touch with again. And that's where the rebuilding of the self, as part of that plan to put structure in is saying, well, I need to rebuild myself, and I'm going to do that. And these are the ways I'm going to do it. And that's so important, because that's where you discover your resilience and your strength.
Absolutely. Izzy, it is such a gift and an honor to spend this time interviewing you, hearing your story, hearing your hope and all of your growth. And I just want to encourage our listeners that if you are in that deep dark pit, that it is possible to find hope and joy and healing again. And you will find information about how to reach out to Izzy if you would like to get in touch with her. Those are going to be in the show notes. I also want to let our listeners know that we only open Women in the Battle memberships for our full length Healing Path courses twice a year in August and February. And so one of those open enrollment times is coming up. This is a great opportunity for you to take that next right step towards healing, towards post traumatic growth. And we are holding out hope for you guys until you have it for yourself. So thank you, Izzy. Is there anything else you want to say before we sign off on this episode?
No, other than I very much advocate and support the ministry of Living Truth and Women in the Battle and Men in the Battle. It's been a phenomenal group for both myself and my husband, and that is where we found our coaches. There's just such a lot of really good men and women in this ministry that have invested their time and energy to get the skills, to gain the skills to help betrayed partners and their husbands. So yeah, I thank you, Kristin, for what you do and for your vision,
Hmm.
and I thank God for that. So thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege to be here.
Thank you, Izzy. All right, friends, until next time, I'm holding out hope for you.